Kids these days have no idea what we went through. I mean, we lived through some true horrors when it came to video games. Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and the worst of all, Banjo Kazooie. Okay, so here's the plan. We are going to make a Banjo Kazooie diorama, but instead of the normal, brightly coloured retro collectathon, we're going to turn it into a survival horror. Those of us who remember the game will know it was a little bit messed up in places, so really we're just bringing what we know to be true inside onto the outside. But we'll get to that. First, we need a base. I grabbed this piece of wood and used it to gauge how big our structure would be so that I could cut out an armature of sorts from some XPS foam. And so I hear you ask, what structure may that be? What from the world of Banjo Kazooie best represents the horror we seek? Easy, Mumbo Jumbo's hut. It's a good place to start. It's already the shape of a skull, and not just any skull. Mumbo, being the original practitioner of narcissistic personality disorder, has a house in the shape of his own head. And side note, even though we aren't making the interior, I just want it to be known that he also has his own face as the wallpaper inside. That level of ego is definitely scary. I used a hot foam cutter to carve out the shape of Mumbo's very big head, in all senses of the phrase. This was just really to get the shape started, and rather than being game accurate, since we're making a spookier version of everything, I tried to go with a more evil looking skull shape with a raised brow, pointier eyes. I will admit though, I didn't intentionally give him nostrils that look like he's had one too many good weekends, but I wouldn't be surprised. So this is about as far as I'm going to go with the hot wire cutter. If you were a better foam carver than I, you could probably go a little bit further, and if you don't mind the screeching noise that cutting foam with a knife makes, you could probably just do the whole thing like that and skip the next step entirely. But because the sensory hell that is akin only to, I don't know, sitting down on your 14-hour flight, realising you're sat between two screaming toddlers whose iPads just ran out of battery, that's not happening for me. To get a less janky shape, I instead resorted to Sculptamold. It's basically a paper pulp plaster, try saying that 3 times fast, that you mix with water till it's lumpier than your grand's mashed ties. Which I realise now that I'm saying it might sound like something very different than I intended if you don't know that's what we call them here. That's mashed potatoes in English. I used said Sculptamold to build up areas like the brow bone and round out the top of the skull. Although I'm obviously changing the shape from the original design of Mumbo's skull in the first game, he has many houses, clearly a massive Tory, and he does vary the designs a bit in the second game, so I think this one could be perfectly possible as an option we just haven't seen. On the base, I hot glued some foam scraps to fill in some space, and then give that a good slather of Sculptamold too. This one I tinted with brown paint because it won't be covered up, so it just makes things easier for future leks. I managed not to record it somehow, but at this stage I did build up some Sculptamold into a little molehill, but we'll get back to that later. So it's been a while, many days in fact, since the last clip that you saw. Sculptamold is a plaster-based product and as such requires time to dry for the water to evaporate and leave you with something solid and ready to work with. That does mean that your environment, the weather, can affect how long that takes, which is brilliant news if you live in the tropical climes of Scotland. Yeah, it has been what we would colloquially refer to as absolutely pissing with rain every single second since the last molecule of Sculptamold was bestowed upon the sky by my very own hands. It has been wetter than your mum's carpet after Gary Barlow's been on the telly. I honestly swear. You might not even be able to hear me very well because of the rain, although that is probably also because on the same day I dropped my microphone into some unrelated water because I'm an idiot, and that's why I'm holding it here to make sure that the light is on. Although funnily enough, the microphone transmitter in its box of silica gel packets took less time to dry and be okay than this thing. So it might not even be dry now, but we're going with it. So before I get washed away like itsy bitsy bloody spider as the floods roll in, we better get going on some stones. Mumbo's hut is made out of them after all. I used my Proxon hot wire cutter again to rip down some more foam into as many bricks as I could manage before feeling like I'd lost my mind. I made sure to make lots of triangular or triangle adjacent shapes since the skull has a lot of those in the game, along with some more random ones. To texture the stones like, well, stone, we use stones. In this not a sewing kit tub, I added the bricks along with their IRL equivalent and got to shaking. The more you shake, the more texture you get, so don't be afraid to go ham if you ever try this technique yourself. No, really, I mean it. You gotta shake pretty hard if you want the good stuff. After letting the stone and foam dust extricate itself from both the tub and hopefully my lungs, I was left with some fab looking stones. Mumbo's hat does have some bigger bricks that represent his teeth, so I cut those out separately and hand textured them. Because they're bigger and thin, I thought they might break being shaken in the box. And I, for one, am certainly not paying Mumbo for the dental work needed to repair a cracked tooth, especially at the prices they're charging these days. Once everything was ready, I could start gluing on bricks with definitely too much tacky glue. I don't remember if I've talked about this before, since the content of my videos evaporates from my consciousness the second I hit upload, but I know there is some discussion about whether carving in brick texture or cutting out individual bricks is better. In my opinion, the right method is the one you enjoy, and I get an inordinate amount of joy from sticking on bricks and grouting them. Maybe it takes a bit longer, but I think it looks better personally. Obviously, that's just me, and I've seen some great looking carved bricks, but I just like doing it this way, so I will continue. And whilst we're sticking away, I will let you in on another reason that we're making Mumbo's skull in particular. And that is because Mumbo is the real villain. I am convinced. Look, I've already given you some great examples. You literally see his true colours whenever you exit the game too. You get a cutscene where Gruntilda successfully steals Banjo's sister's beauty, and Mumbo immediately starts simping for cunty grunty. Honestly, some men only think with their transmutation-empowered magic staff. Anyway, while we wait for that glue to dry, which won't be quick since it's still fucking raining, let's use that time to start on some of the other things we need to make this house a spooky little home. In the game, Mumbo's skull has a chimney and some feathers on top, so let's start there. For the chimney, I grabbed these pipe toys that I bought ages ago because I saw Eric of Eric's Hobby Workshop using them once, and they are brilliant for so many things. I've gotten heaps of use out of them. This time though, I needed to chop them up to get the right shape, and after nearly taking a finger off with my hobby saw, I resorted to the Dremel. Then I clipped off the bottom of this dollhouse wine glass. My apologies to the dollhouse wine mum who's going without her Pinot Gris tonight, and started gluing the bits together. The cap of the chimney is actually a tiny spinning top from a Christmas cracker that I'd saved, which is probably the only time one of the Christmas cracker prizes has seen any use past yeeting one of those fortune-telling fish at your dad because he won't wear the paper hat. After a quick prime and some extra CA glue to look like messy welding, I painted it silver. In our horror version, the chimney is going to be old and rusty, so I added some darker colours before moving on to the Holy Grail, Dirty Down Rust, and set that aside. Instead of feathers, I'm using some twigs that have been dried out and baked. I thought rather than just doing straight featherless quills, the twigs would add a bit more dimension. I painted them up in bright red and went in with a darker wash and lighter dry brush. Now it's about time to start referencing some of our favourite levels in the game, and what better way to start than with the actual spooky themed level, Mad Monster Mansion. Mumbo transforms you into a cute little pumpkin in this level, so that's what we're gonna make. I sculpted one with some green stuff and used a roll maker to texture an extra curly stem. The pumpkin is my favourite transformation. Feel free to argue about that in the comments. Yes, I like the washing machine too, but the pumpkin bounces and his little lid pops up, so you can't beat that. Cute as he is though, this is the horror version, so we're making our pumpkins faceless, backpackless, and kinda mouldy. Mumbo probably transformed these two and then buggered off to one of his other 40 houses before bothering to turn them back, and this is how they ended up. After another base, wash, dry brush, repeat on the pumpkins, the glue on the hut was finally mostly dry. Okay, so he's all covered in bricks now. Next we need to seal up all of that foam. And I've done loads of projects like this with foam bricks that I've grouted, and you can either seal it before grouting or after. There's pros and cons to both ways, But I think in this project, because there's such a colour difference between the bricks and the grout, I'm going to do it before, and I think that'll give us the best results with the least amount of effort. To seal the foam, I mixed up the tried and true Mod Podge and paint concoction. I tried to go with a yellowy orange colour since this might show through later and that's the colour of the bricks we're aiming for. I slapped that on all over the skull, making sure to get in every nook and cranny. Turns out the glue wasn't quite as dry as I'd thought, as I did come back to it to see a white liquid dripping from Mumbo's eye socket. I guess no one told him to avoid aiming for the eyes. After everything really was dry, I could paint on a base coat of orangey yellow for the main bricks and a lighter yellow for the toothy ones. If you're thinking of doing this on your own projects, I will just say now that when you go to grout these, a bunch of this paint will probably come off, but as I'm doing a rundown vibe, I kind of want that, hence why I coloured the Mod Podge underneath. But if you don't, I'd suggest maybe clear coating before the next step. It was time now for my favourite part, the grouting. I mixed up some wall filler, which I think you might call spackle in other countries. I'm not going to bother googling that, but it's certainly possible. I used some green paint to tint it, since in the game the grout is also kind of green, and I wanted an undertone of that here too. Grouting and wiping is so satisfying. Incredibly messy, but heaps fun. With a wet rag, you can remove all of the extra filler, and once again, we'll leave that to dry and get back to our set dressing. I grabbed the base and got to painting it in a mix of black and brown washes. After that, I used a mix of light browns, greys and greens to dry brush all over. I want this looking like a dry, cracked kind of dirt, so I went in fairly heavy. And here's that molehill that I didn't film me making, but hey, proof it exists. But again, we'll get back to this later. To add to the base, I cut a section of styrene tubing and painted it silver. I cut a hole in the Sculpt-A-Mold, and yes, I could have done all this when I first put it on there, but I rarely plan that much about my projects in advance. This little tube is going to be a sewage pipe running right out of Mumbo's humble abode. I wanted a way to reference things like Clanker's Cavern, the level full of literal sewage water. Clanker is Gruntilda's personal trash compactor, who's been chained under the surface, breathing in whatever is floating about in there. To make running water frozen in time, I half-cured some UV resin strips and stuck those down first with a little bit more resin. I wanted this to be extra bubbly to remind us all of the absolute unfettered rage that was trying to swim through those bubbles at the bottom of Clanker's big plug hole. You would just drown while trying to aim the clunky swimming mechanics towards the bubble that the perspective made you think was right in front of you, but was actually on the other side of the bloody Atlantic. For the bubbles, I actually used the very same silica gel balls that had saved my microphone just days before. I stirred those into some tinted UV resin and cured in a few layers. Now it's time to make the reference that will really haunt all of us. Rusty Bucket fucking Bay. If you've played Banjo Kazooie, then you're probably still talking about Rusty Bucket Bay in therapy. I found this toy bucket and got rid of the terrible handle that it came with and got to rusting it up real good. I mean, it's in the name, isn't it? Rusty Bucket Bay is the second to last level in the game and features the most frustrating jiggy challenge in the whole thing. You have to traverse this engine room with fans and moving platforms that fling you into the abyss if you so much as breathe the wrong way. And on top of that, you're on a timer. And on top of that, in the original version of the game, if you die, you lose all of the musical notes you've collected in the level. And of course, as a dumb kid, I always left this bit for last and then lost all of my notes when I inevitably went careening off the platform or got to the jiggy 0.4 milliseconds too late. Anyways, I made a much better handle off camera and that was that. Well, since I spent all that time ranting, the filler has definitely dried. It's a bit more of a minty toothpaste green than I had wanted. It does lighten up as it dries, but it lightened up a bit more than I expected. It looks like mint chocolate chip ice cream, but not even the classic radioactive green one that had 0 real mint in, but so many E numbers your almond mum would have a conniption just looking at the ingredients. After a few dark washes though, I managed to get rid of the mint and get on with the stones. I gave them a few layers of very heavy dry brushing with darker colours, moving up to lighter dry brushing in progressively lighter colours, in between some more washes to build up some variation in tone. And of course I got those teeth looking nice and white, since Mumbo definitely has enough hoarded wealth to afford a set of Hollywood veneers. For our next level reference, we head to Freeze Easy Peak, where we experience one of the truest horrors in the game, an absentee father. When you pop into the level, you find this house of crying children, all waiting on their dad coming home with their Christmas presents, which we'll make by wrapping chunks of foam in patterned paper. Sadly for the kids, Boggy here has actually spent the present money on beer, and you'll find him meters from the house, clearly been on a bender and passed out before he even made it home. Instead of ribbon, I used some twine to wrap around the gifts. Again, we're trying to go for a darker version, so along with the more muted paper colours, I think it gives the right vibe. And let's be honest with ourselves, Boggy probably couldn't bother his arse to go get some ribbon, so just found what he had in the garage. These presents are pretty big compared to everything else we've made, but in the game's exaggerated cartoony style, that's kind of how they are. And as I always bang on about, scale is only a suggestion. Except maybe not quite in this case, since I quickly decided I didn't like how big they were and remade them all much smaller. So I got those presents dirtied up to match the ground they'll be left in, probably like Boggy would have if he'd even bothered to get them in the first place. Mumbo's far-reaching narcissism extends itself to the Mumbo tokens you collect to pay him for the transformations he performs, which are also shaped like his massive head. So I grabbed a skull bead and painted it silver like the tokens are in the game. To go with that, we of course need a Jiggy, aka Jigsaw piece, which is the main collectible in the game. I grabbed a piece from an actual jigsaw I have, traced it, went to cut it out, and realised, just looks a bit shite, doesn't it? At this point, I'd been working on this for so long, I just grabbed a piece from a jigsaw I didn't like as much and painted that. Sometimes the simple way is the best way, you know? They are gold in the game, so that's what I went with, before adding some silver for weathering, as if the golden jiggies were just gold-plated fakes. And of course threw on some more rust for good measure. So next we're going to work on including a reference to what might be the most horrifying thing in all of Banjo Kazooie, and it actually happens in Banjo Tooie, the sequel. In the first game, we're treated to reoccurring appearances from Bottles. He teaches you new skills, all whilst Kazooie makes fun of him for being such a specky prick. Which I'm allowed to say, by the way, because without my contact lenses, I too employ spectacles thicker than a Disney mum's arse, so I can relate. But in the opening sequence of the second game, poor Bottles is blown to bits by Grunty and her sisters. He is a goner. And you might say, characters die a lot in these games. You're killing enemies left, right and centre. It can't be that bad. That's not the horrifying part. Just a few minutes later, you stroll into the Bottles' home. His wife and kids are there, and you just don't tell them. Banjo and Kazooie keep the secret of him being dead. They're talking about him coming home for dinner and taking them to football practice, so they clearly don't know. And even Kazooie says that you should tell them, and she's been ripping the piss out of poor Bottles this whole time. But no, Bottles is outside, burnt to a crisp like a forgotten chicken nugget that fell out of the basket in the McDonald's deep fat fryer, and you say absolutely nothing. It's not a good look for our protagonists. I will say though, interestingly enough, if you go into Bottles and his wife's room, which you know is theirs because there's another narcissistic portrait on the wall, hidden next to her bedside table is this little wee green dude. So yeah, without the presence of the hotel cuck chair, we can safely say that Bottles is being stepped out on. So maybe Mrs. Bottles doesn't deserve to know the truth. To represent dearly departed Bottles, I wanted to make his iconic milk bottle specs. I bent some wire into a vague glasses shape, making a few spares in case I mess up making the lenses, because I just can't be trusted. I grabbed a silicone mould that was fairly shiny since any texture will be picked up, then dripped some UV resin into the spaces for the lenses and cured it. And they actually came out way better than I thought. I tried to steady my shaky hands and paint them red, which I probably should have done before the resin, but I thought this would look a bit better. I left those to dry and we'll get them on the molehill in just a bit. In the meantime, we have to make sure the people know of Mumbo's villainy, so what better way than with wanted posters. I made these with my mediocre Photoshop skills and printed out a few sizes, but I did end up going with just the smaller ones. I made lots for Mumbo, one for Boggy since we know social services are after him, and one of Logo, the toilet from Mad Monster Mansion, for no other reason than I just don't like the cut of his jib. I crumpled them up, tore some bits, and gave them a healthy brown wash to age and weather them up. Back to the building itself, and Mumbo needs a door. And for that we need the crafter's ultimate companion, coffee stirring sticks, which make the perfect scale wood planks. I give them extra wood grain detail with a riffler tool and use a hobby knife to carve off the edges. I made a template of the door hole. Door hole? Doorway! That's what people call them, Lex. Doorways. I used the sticky side of masking tape over the template and some CA glue to stick everything together. I gave the door in some extra boards of brown wash and then a greyish, brownish, greenish dry brush. Then I cut some teeny tiny bits of wire to act as bent nails, keeping the boards together. He needs a door because it needs to be boarded up. Probably hasn't paid his 2nd or 15th home tax. I used hot glue to attach everything to the skull, and off camera I also added some more dirty down rust to the nails to finish them off. We're getting near the end now, but we can't have Banjo Kazooie without Banjo and Kazooie. I got this angry dire bear mini and this... okay, it's a vulture. I know Kazooie's not a vulture, but the scale birds are just a bit too small, and this is the horror version. She has the vibes of a vulture, okay? But first, to make this grizzly into our favourite bear, he needs his iconic yellow shorts. After trying and failing to figure out a pattern to make the shorts all in one go, I slapped on a sheet of epoxy clay and shaped it the best I could. They were a little long, so I chopped them down, but they still look a bit more like jorts than shorts. Don't forget to add a gusset to the undercarriage, that's very important. I then added a belt, some markings for the seams, and a tiny little buckle. We don't want these jorts falling down. Next, he needed a backpack for Kazooie to burst out of. They never actually animated the backpack opening, so she just kind of phases through it in the game, so I decided to try and make it look like she'd just ripped out of the top. My sculpting skills at this scale still aren't the best, so whether it actually looks like that or not is up for debate. I glued Vultui in there and sculpted around her, adding straps and flaps where needed. After priming, I could get to painting. My mini painting skills may be even worse than my sculpting at this small scale. Like I said, I have very shaky hands, so just, bear with. You get it? 'Cause he's a bear? Yeah? No? Okay. I started with the fur since I knew I'd mess up the rest if I didn't, so that got a few coats of speed paint, various dry brushes and washes, and in order to negate this still raining outside, I let him dry in front of the fire between coats. I highlighted his claws and face since they are a lighter colour in the game, and then held my breath to do the eyes and give him his little black nose. I painted the backpack a nice medium blue and the shorts their iconic bright yellow. Although we're making a darker horror version, I thought it would be much more fun to have the backpack, shorts, and even Kazooie herself still pretty bright like they are in the game as a contrast to the actual models. I'm trying not to be too repetitive here, but I don't know how many ways I can say the words washes, dry brushes, highlights in one video, but that's pretty much my only painting technique. I'm not very talented at wet blending, but I did give that a go to get the red to yellow gradient on Kazooie. And hey, after a few layers, it's passable. Then some detail work like black for the belt and silver for the buckle, and even more breath holding for the eyes, which honestly make it look like Kazooie's just heard someone say that Big Bang Theory was their favourite TV show.
Bombastic side eye.
And with that, bear and bird were finished, so now we can start putting everything together. I stuck in the chimney and the twigs, and then glued the whole thing to the base. I added my nemesis, the rusty bucket, presents, the Jiggy and Mumbo token, and the pumpkins. I used some texture paste to fill in the ugly gaps and painted it to match everything else off camera. I used a little tacky glue to attach the wanted posters, including Boggy's right above the evidence of his crimes. Then I grabbed my static grass applicator and some dead, dry coloured static grass and started adding that in patches all around the base. I'm always so amazed this actually works. Save that excess for later, but don't forget to cover up your nasty glue issues with a little bit of what's left. We mustn't forget Bottles' molehill, which yes, I have finally come back to. Since he got blown to bits, it's only fitting that we use some pigment powder, mine is just crushed up chalk pastel and black, and brush that on as if it were soot on the molehill and specks, as a wee nod to his fate. Then last but not least, we have to add our bear and bird. I used 5-minute epoxy for strength, and after holding it for definitely way more than 5 minutes, it was finally done.
And with that, we're all finished, and I think it came out fairly well. Hopefully didn't ruin too many childhoods in the process. But before we get to the beauty shots, I just want to say thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment below with what other video games you'd like to see me horrify, which is definitely not a word, but you get the idea. Let me know that down below. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out the Patreon, all the usual stuff. And thank you so much again for watching, and I'll catch us after.